Hey y'all, welcome back to Shooting the Breeze. I'm your host Michaela, and today we're diving into a topic that hits home for so many women in faith communities. It's the Proverbs 31 woman. If you've been in church ever or around church people, you've probably heard about her. She is the epitome of what it means to be a godly woman. Most Mother's Days that I can remember, this passage was at least cited somewhere in the sermon for Mother's Day. I'll be honest with you, I used to feel haunted by her. I'd hear this passage referenced in sermons, Bible studies, and even casual conversations as the ultimate standard for what a godly woman should be. And I think to myself, how on earth can I ever live up to that? If you've ever felt the same way, like you're measuring your worth by a never-ending checklist of qualities, this episode's for you. We're going to take a closer look at Proverbs 31, explore what it really means and doesn't mean, and unpack how Jesus' message in the New Testament offers us something radically different. I'm also going to be drawing from one of my favorite books, one of my favorite devotionals, Joanna Weaver's incredible book, Having a Merry Heart in a Martha World. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's get to it. All right, so who is the Proverbs 31 woman? Let's start with the passage itself. Proverbs 31, 10 through 31 is a poetic tribute to the wife of noble character. It's an acrostic poem in Hebrew, where each verse starts with a different letter of the alphabet. So if you're like me and it's been a minute since you learned about poetry, you might not remember what an acrostic poem is. An acrostic poem is where the first letter or the last letter or some other letter will line up and spell out a word, name, or phrase when it's read vertically. So this is a poem that took into account every verse started with the next alphabetical letter. So it is a literary masterpiece, but it's also one that has caused generations of women to probably feel a little bit overwhelmed, myself included. So this woman is described as hardworking, resourceful, wise, and kind. She gets up while it's still night, and she provides food for her family. Proverbs 31:15. She sets about her work vigorously. Her arms are strong for her task. Proverbs 31:17. She opens her arms to the poor and extends her hands to the needy. Proverbs 31:20. My personal favorite, her lamp does not go out at night. Proverbs 31:18. Y'all, if my lamp doesn't go out at night, it's because I fell asleep binge watching a Netflix series. I'm serious. The other one that I thought is always interesting is her children rise up and call her blessed. Again, I can't tell you the last time that happened. They do tell me I'm pretty, but it's usually after I was the victim of or the collateral damage of a Nerf war in the house, and I'm about to blow my fuse. So here's the thing. For years, I really approached this passage like it was a checklist or a commandment. At the end of the day, instead of praying or really reflecting on my relationship with God, I'd mentally go down the list. Did I work hard enough today? Did I provide enough? Did I measure up to this ideal of this woman? But you know what's missing from this passage? Any mention of prayer, worship, or the woman's personal relationship with God. For a passage often held up as the pinnacle of biblical womanhood, that's a pretty glaring omission, don't you think? So I had to do a little bit of research. Here's what is often misunderstood about Proverbs 31. This passage isn't a rule book or a set of commandments. It's a poem. It's likely written by King Lemuel and based on wisdom from his mother. So maybe his mother told him, this is what you look for in a wife. Or maybe it's based off of something he saw his mother doing and it was meant to be a tribute to her. Theologians like John Piper and Tim Keller point out that the Proverbs 31 woman is an ideal, a celebration of the many ways women contribute to their families, communities, and their faith. It's really aspirational, not prescriptive. So instead of seeing this as a daily checklist, what if we just saw it as a poetic tribute, a reminder of the diverse ways women can live out their faith? So to contrast the Proverbs 31 woman, and that is a passage that I have carried with me and really kind of tucked away into my heart and meditated on many, many times. That's something from the Old Testament that I really cling to. It's very funny to me that the story from the New Testament that I cling to, and if you know me at all, I've probably recommended the book to you, is the story in Luke chapter 10 about Mary and Martha. So I really want to explore that a little bit to truly understand what God desires from us. So in Luke 10:38 through 42, we meet two sisters, Mary and Martha. Martha is a doer. Martha is like, oh my goodness, Jesus is at my house. I got to get the food on. I got to, make sure everything's clean. He brought all these people with him. How much food do I need? And she is busy, running around her house and stressing. And what is her little sister doing? She is sitting there listening to Jesus. And Martha gets really upset and she turns to Jesus and this is not a direct quote, but she looks at him and she's like, Jesus, are you going to tell her to get off her lazy butt and do something? She's not being a Proverbs 31 woman. And these were Jewish women. They'd read Proverbs 31, right? So they knew the scriptures. They were educated. So she looks at Jesus and she says, what's going on? She's not doing what she's supposed to be doing. And Jesus responds to her. This is a direct quote. I won't paraphrase the Lord. He said, Martha, Martha, you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her today. Y'all, this story is the perfect contrast to the Proverbs 31 narrative. While Martha's caught up in her tasks, Mary chooses to simply be with Jesus. And another thing I love to point out is Martha is burdened by her tasks. She's not finding joy in this. She's not doing it for the service of the Lord. She is doing it because it's a checklist. And Mary has chosen to just sit, but in that, Mary has chosen joy and simplicity. So if you've ever been around me in person, I have probably recommended this book to you. It is called Having a Mary Heart in a Martha World. When I actually converted to Catholicism from evangelical Christianity, I took Martha as my patron saint because I just related to her so much. I wanted a saint that was in the Bible, and I just identified with Martha so much. So this book, Having a Mary Heart in a Martha World, is kind of one of my go-tos. If I haven't read it or I find myself stressing like this, I go back and I reread it because it's always a good reminder. But the author, Joanna Weaver, she does a great job exploring the tension beautifully. And she actually talks about the Proverbs 31 woman, which is interesting to me because I had read it before. I was truly convicted. And I'll share my conviction story and how that happened for me in a moment. But she says, the Proverbs 31 woman is not meant to be a standard that women are forced to live up to, but rather an encouragement to live out the life God has called us to with faith and joy. So that was a huge striker for me, is Martha had no joy in what she was doing. She was overwhelmed and burdened by what she was doing. So Weaver challenges us to ask, are we living with a Martha mindset, constantly striving, constantly burdened, or are we cultivating a Mary heart focused on just being present with Jesus? And so I will say the way that this conviction started for me is I was lying in bed one night and I was doing my checklist, and I was going down. I said, did I do this? Did I do this? And I was trying to do it from memory, the things I could remember that the Proverbs 31 woman did. But I was so stressed that night and feeling so inadequate and so overburdened that I literally picked up my Bible to neurotically check off every single thing. And I did. Or there were like maybe 2 or 3 things that were missing. But overall, I was scoring, 85-90% of what the Proverbs 31 woman did in a day. And so I was sitting there, but in looking at everything she did, it struck me hard, like a lightning bolt over the head. It struck me. It never talked about her prayer life. She didn't go to synagogue. She fears the Lord. It says that, but it doesn't talk about how or what that relationship is like. And I was so convicted, but also so freed in that moment. The rest of this didn't come into place, connecting it to Mary and Martha didn't all come into place until later. But in that moment, I just closed my Bible and I laid down. I cried, I'm pretty sure, because I just felt free of this to-do list, this never-ending to-do list. And I laid down and I just prayed until I went to sleep. And there was something so life-giving about that moment. And I'm not going to say that I don't ever do that anymore. I still do. I still get caught up in the to-do list. But it's easy to remind myself that there is good news. And the good news is Jesus doesn't ask us to be perfect. He asks us to just be in relationship with him. In Matthew 11:28-30, Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." Y'all, rest isn't just nice to have. It is a literal command. It's obedience. When we focus solely on the Proverbs 31 checklist, we risk becoming like Martha, busy and burdened, when Jesus is inviting us to rest and trust in him. So how do we balance these two realities? How do we keep our roles as busy moms, busy wives, busy business owners, busy employees, whatever it is that you do? How do we honor the spirit of a Proverbs 31 woman without turning it into a source of guilt and exhaustion? I came up with 3 things. Number 1, we have to stop using Proverbs 31 as a scorecard. Instead of asking, did I do enough today? Ask yourself, how did I connect with Jesus in what I had to do today? What ways did I connect with him while I was doing what needed to be done? Number 2, recognize your strengths. The Proverbs 31 woman is celebrated for her unique gifts. Maybe you're not buying fields or weaving fabric, but are you showing up for your family? Are you showing up for your community? Are you doing some sort of charity work? Are you volunteering? Are you making your community a better place? And are you showing up in your faith? If you can answer yes to those 3 things, you're doing enough. Number 3, we have to embrace rest. Rest is not a bad thing. Take time to sit at Jesus' feet, like Mary. Prioritize prayer and reflection and stillness. The Proverbs 31 woman is inspiring, but she is not the full picture of biblical womanhood. Jesus invites us into something deeper, not a life of endless striving, endless burdens, endless to-do lists. What he invites us to is a relationship with him. If you've ever struggled with the pressure of do it all, I really hope this episode encourages you to step off the hamster wheel and into the grace and the rest that Jesus offers us. All right, friends, before we go, I want to take a moment and thank you all for your patience in the release of this episode. I had the majority of it recorded, but hadn't yet recorded this segment of comments, and I loved what y'all had to say so much that I wanted to do it justice. In fact, I enjoyed your feedback so much that I've decided to make it a regular segment called What Y'all Had to Say. So each week, I'm going to carve out some time at the end of the podcast to share and respond to your thoughts, because I believe that community is what makes life amazing. So why not apply that to the podcast as well? Now, part of the delay came because life threw me an unexpected curveball. I ended up taking a 2-week substitute teaching job at the high school right before midterms. So between grading projects and actually teaching material every day, my workload skyrocketed and I couldn't find time to record until Christmas break started. But here we are, and I'm so excited to finally have this episode out for you guys. So going back to not last week's, but the last episode on banned books, y'all had some very insightful comments and I loved them. So I wanted to take a moment and respond to a few of them before we wrap up today. Your feedback truly brings this podcast to life, and I'm so grateful for it. So if you have thoughts, write them on YouTube, write them on Spotify, send them, text them to me. I don't care. But yeah, I thought it was amazing. Send on Instagram or also on email at shootingthebreeze247@gmail. And the Instagram is shooting_the_breeze_podcast. So on to the comments. One of you shared, if you don't have these conversations with your child, especially the uncomfortable ones, they will learn it all wrong at lunch. And that couldn't be more true. I know for me, it was so true. I know I would go and I would hear things on the bus or in the lunchroom or even from teachers that I knew did not jive with what my family had taught me personally. So I was a big talker, obviously. And I would go home and I would talk to my mom about it and ask her perspective. Now, I didn't always agree with my mom, but at least I had her perspective as well as this other person's. I ended up getting to chat to this person a little bit on Instagram, and she ended up giving me an example about her son in high school and a teacher he had who wasn't exactly her cup of tea as a parent. She shared how this teacher's borderline and sometimes inappropriate comments and actions actually kept her son highly engaged in the class. And it's funny because I also had this teacher, and as a ninth grader, I thought he was hilarious. And I thought the things he said were funny. And I was engaged in his class, and he did make learning more enjoyable because he was just downright entertaining. Now, as a parent, there are definitely things he said and did that I do not agree with and wouldn't want my kids necessarily agreeing with. However, this parent, she handled it so perfectly. Instead of shutting down or reacting out of frustration and maybe pulling her kid out of the class, she used it as an opportunity to have an open and honest conversation with her son about what was said and done. She offered her perspective as a mother and helped him process the experience while also teaching him to think critically and develop his own set of values. So to me, this was just such a powerful reminder that we can't and we shouldn't control everything our kids are exposed to, but we can control how we prepare them to navigate these types of moments throughout their life. Another comment asked, could there be parental consent for certain books at school? Yes. I totally agree with this. Honestly, we should turn all school libraries into the Hogwarts library, complete with a restricted section. And instead of needing a note from Professor Dumbledore, parents can just sign off on what their kids check out. I know that I'm kind of making light of the situation, but I know in my district, and I think I said this in the podcast, you cannot even show anything over a G-rated movie without permission slips. So I don't see how books should be any different, even at the high school level. I know even for high schoolers, if they're going to watch something that's PG-13, PG, they have to get a signed permission slip from their parents. And is that more work on teachers? Yes, a little bit, but I think that is a perfect common sense solution to this issue. Someone else asked me, will I please put the links to books or products that I am recommending? Yes, absolutely. I will start adding those in the show notes moving forward so that you all have a quick and easy way to find what I mentioned on the podcast. Finally, to the person who said, thank you for saying what so many teachers wish they could say. Your words humbled me. Teachers are incredible. And if this podcast can help amplify their voices or speak to their experiences, or really any other daily heroes that we don't always amplify, then I am doing what I set out to do. That's exactly what I want to do. So thank you so much for that comment. As we head into the new year, I really hope that this episode reminds you that Proverbs 31 isn't a checklist of impossible standards to meet. It's an invitation to live with purpose and grace, not perfection.
Life's already full of to-do lists, and this time of year can make us feel like we have to reinvent ourselves completely. But the truth is, you don't have to be everything all at once. Focus on small steps, meaningful moments, and trusting God's plan for your life. Thank you so much for being part of this community. Keep sending in your thoughts and questions. They inspire me, and I know they'll inspire others too. If you have ideas for something you'd love to be discussed, reach out. You can reach out on Instagram, by email. You can comment on YouTube. You can comment on Spotify. And now we are on Apple Podcasts. So until next time, grab your sweet tea and keep shining, friends.